Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Mette. Thanks so much for being here. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content.
So I'm going to start off with Democrats suck, and boy, do they suck. So to be fair, so does Donald Trump, but I'm going to highlight their suckage in this. So Donald Trump gave his first joint address to Congress, and it was chock full of really disgusting things. But don't worry, guys, because I feel like we're in really good hands. Check out what some members of Congress did. All right, it's on, guys. Basically, if you're just listening, what you're seeing is, I don't know if I'd call it a sea, because it's not enough of them. It's maybe like a pond of pink. I like that pop. With certain members of Congress wearing pink, which I guess is going to somehow save the Republic. Not really sure what they were going for. It's not a nice color. I like the aesthetic. If that's the point, just to have a pop, if you will, of color, that's cool to have a pop of color. But in terms of stopping Trump, not sure how that's going to work. And you know what? This was so pathetic that even big Democrat cheerleader and kind of resistance lib Stephen Colbert mocked the Democrat response. Let's take a look.
The man barked out one appalling claim after another, but don't you worry. The Democrats came ready to fight back with their little paddles, okay? That is how you save democracy, by quietly dissenting or bidding on an antique tea set. It was hard to tell what was going on. I'm just kidding. That was very cool, Democrats. In fact, I made my own sign.
And for those of you out there who are just listening, his sign said, "Try doing something."
I mean, I'm a little bothered by the pink thing because it appropriates the color of code pink, which actually does do something. They stand up to warmongers no matter what party they're in, whether it's the Republicans or Democrats. And I feel like these milquetoast Democrats are stealing code pink shine. So I wish they would get a different color because they're disgracing the noble legacy of pink. My favorite sign was put up by Congressmember Melanie Stansbury, who stood next to Trump and showed this. This is not normal. This is not normal. I don't think that line works anymore. I think that was introduced in Trump's first term. Right. And everyone was freaking out all the time. This is not normal. I just don't think that's going to land with most people. Because first of all, for some people, this is not normal sounds cool. Like, okay, great.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's breaking convention. Yeah. Like he's changing it up. This is not normal. Great.
Aaron, did you see when you were growing up, like when you were a teenager, did you ever encounter a button that said, "Why be normal"?
Not that I remember. It's been a while, but no, I don't remember that one. Yeah.
So that's what the Republicans could do, is they could stand next to that woman, Melanie, and have a sign that says, "Why be normal."
I hear that. And that would appeal to all like the people in society who are breaking with the mold, and they're thinking like Republicans, like that's the hip party right now.
Exactly.
And it really plays into the
squares.
Yeah, it really plays into this new sort of culture vibe shift they keep talking about. Like the Republicans are like the cool party now, which is so stupid. But I mean, to have a Democrat saying this is not normal and being kind of like a teacher's pet, it does play into that.
But don't worry, because in addition to the signs and the pink, the Democrats really have this taken care of. Nothing to worry about. They are going to challenge Donald Trump so effectively. And who did the Democrats choose to deliver their response? None other than Michigan Senator and former CIA agent Elisa Slotkin. And that is a great look, by the way. You definitely want to have a former CIA officer delivering a response. It's like the biggest favor for Trump, who pretends to be this anti-deep state guy. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
As a Cold War kid, I'm thankful it was Reagan and not Trump in office in the 1980s. Trump would have lost us the Cold War.
So this is great because what's better than having the Democrats point to Ronald Reagan as a hero? What's better than having the Democrats also choose a woman who was a CIA officer, respond to Donald Trump, given that Donald Trump likes to fancy himself as an opponent of the deep state? And, why not choose, FDR as someone to praise? If they need to pick a Democrat to praise. But can you imagine if after one of these things delivered by a Democrat president, if Republicans were like, "Oh, I'm so glad. I'm glad LBJ was president, or I'm glad JFK was president, or I'm glad Bill Clinton was president, or I miss the days of Bill Clinton." Wouldn't happen because everything is so shifted to the right, and the Democrats have helped make that happen.
Yeah, you got to praise Ronald Reagan for some reason. Barack Obama did it. Everyone loves to praise Reagan, despite all the blood on his hands. By the way, I mean, calling yourself a Cold War kid, I mean, hey, that's kind of a weird thing to say. But also, especially if she was like, she didn't live through like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like, I can understand if you live through that, like, okay, then you're a Cold War kid because that's like the peak of the Cold War when the world was almost destroyed.
Right.
But the 80s was just like,
Iran-Contra scandal.
Yeah, exactly. And basically Reagan arming death squads in Central America under the guise of fighting the Soviets. Not anywhere close as dangerous as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which at least Slotkin did not have to live through.
Right. But I mean, it's also relevant and significant that she's praising Reagan. First of all, just praising Reagan is a good Democrat suck. But also remember, in the context of the Cold War, he did, as you just mentioned, Aaron, fund, train death squads. And also, like, these Democrats who claim to care about decorum and the sanctity of the office of president, there was the Iran-Contra scandal. I mean, they did lie to Congress, right? Because they trained and supported terrorists. So that's, I wonder how much, she may honestly be a fan of the Contras, though, because look at Ana Navarro, who's now a Democrat. She's comes from a line of Contras. So maybe next response to Trump, they should just skip the middleman, not praise Trump, not praise Reagan, and just praise the Contras.
And again, we're talking about Trump here, who is presiding over massive cuts to social programs. That's what they're threatening. They've just pushed through this budget plan that will see cuts to Medicaid. They're talking about cutting Social Security, and they're claiming this all has to do with fraud, and they're just going to uncover waste. But really, this is just a smokescreen to go after people's benefits, I think. And that's what I think Democrats should be focused on, not trying to appeal to people who miss Ronald Reagan, which I think is a really shrinking constituency. Kamala Harris tried that by campaigning with Liz Cheney. It didn't pan out in the election. I don't see why Democrats think it's going to work out for them now. For Republican suck, let's turn to one of Donald Trump's top priorities, which is threatening students with deportation if they exercise their rights to free speech over the issue of Palestine. Here he is making a threat on social media. All federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests. Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No masks. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So it's not clear who exactly Donald Trump is threatening because he doesn't name, the kind of legal protests he's thinking of. But it's obvious he's talking about pro-Palestine protests, the wave of anti-genocide encampments that swept the country last year and are still ongoing on some campuses, including at Columbia in New York City, and threatening people with deportation. And what happened to free speech, which was a big Republican talking point. And somebody else pushing this, he's not technically a Republican, but he serves in a Republican administration. And that is the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is somehow seeing the fight against anti-Semitism, quote unquote, as being a part of his mandate as Health and Human Services Secretary. And this is what he said on social media. Anti-Semitism, like racism, is a spiritual and moral malady that sickens societies and kills people with lethalities comparable to history's most deadly plagues. In recent years, the censorship and false narratives of woke cancel culture have transformed our great universities into greenhouses for this deadly and virulent pestilence. Making America healthy means building communities of trust and mutual respect based on speech, freedom, and open debate. So let's parse this statement because it's so nutty. So he says that anti-Semitism is a deadly plague.
And this is very damning because, of course, he is the Health and Human Services Secretary. So when he talks about a pestilence and a plague and a malady, it's especially has a lot of weight and gravitas.
So then he's saying that the censorship and false narratives of woke cancel culture, okay, have transformed universities into greenhouses for this deadly pestilence.
And he says metaphor.
And then he says we have to make America healthy by having speech freedom and open debate. But he's announcing here a crackdown on open debate and speech freedom because he wants to. It's obvious what he's doing. He's going after people on college campuses who support Palestinian freedom, and he's saying that they're anti-Semites. So, in the name of challenging woke cancel culture and defending free speech and making America healthy, he wants to crack down on the free speech of college students who oppose genocide in Palestine. And to make this, I mean, on top of being like just flagrantly hypocritical, how possibly is this within his mandate as the Health and Human Services Secretary when you're
because it's a malady, Aaron. It's a plague.
But his like portfolio officially is like things like Medicaid, which it looks like Trump is cutting. And now Bobby Kennedy Jr. is saying we have to crack down on free speech, basically, in the name of defending free speech and challenging woke cancel culture. When he is the real woke cancel culture because he can't tolerate people on college campuses opposing genocide.
Right, yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
It's interesting, by the way, that he's so anti-Semitism. He's so opposed to anti-Semitism. You know, he did get into trouble with certain people. Some people found his comments a little anti-Semitic when he said COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
That was a big scandal for him. So maybe he'll be censoring himself for, you know, it's just so flagrantly hypocritical. And this is one of their top priorities. Here, for example, also is Elise Stefanik, who is Trump's ambassador to the UN, also basically saying that she will be cracking down on anyone at the UN who dares to defend Palestinian rights.
And my message for Turtle Bay is this. Hear me clearly, right here and now. The anti-Semites at the United Nations better buckle up because I'm coming. The university presidents were just a warm-up, and believe me, anyone who knows me knows that I'm just getting started.
So Turtle Bay is the neighborhood where the UN headquarters is located in Manhattan. And she's saying that just like I got college presidents fired last year because they weren't cracking down on pro-Palestine free speech, I'm coming for you here at the UN, her new job.
What's interesting also is this development in the context of J.D. Vance's recent comments in Germany, where he, waxed poetic about free speech and criticized censorship, criticized Europe for being a place of censorship. And it turns out, I guess, that you only have free speech if you are the far-right, Nazi-adjacent German political party, AfD.
And of course, if you're a supporter of the Israeli government, then you can say whatever you want. You can threaten whoever you want. You can smear whoever you want. It's only people who are opposed to genocide, especially if they're vulnerable college students who don't have the right to speak and possibly, according to Trump, even face deportation.
Right. But if you are a college student on the other side, you're allowed to whack people with pieces of equipment and use the N-word at them and spit at them. Let's move on to Isn't That Weird? Take a look at this headline from Variety. Deborah Messing, Emmanuel Shrieky, Mayim Bialik to headline new digital series, quote, And They're Jewish, end quote, hosted by influencer Hen Mazik. So first thing I want to say about this is they obviously didn't do a very good job with casting because the aim of the show is to humanize Jews, and they clearly should have cast you and me, Aaron. But seriously, this is to combat anti-Semitism, and I don't think it's going to work. I think this could actually create more anti-Semitism to have these people be the official face of Jews. In case you're worried that PR won't work, let's take a look at this video, which is honestly, I really thought was a parody. I thought this video was made by anti-Zionists to make fun of Zionist ADL fans. Take a look at this.
We're Jewish women with big racks. Of course we're at an anti-Semitism conference.
We're Jewish women with big racks. We use our assets to combat anti-Semitism.
And by the way, for people who can't see, they're at a conference where it says ADL, and they're wearing I don't know, clothing that emphasizes their racks. Okay.
We're Jewish women with big racks. Of course we're the real freedom fighters.
We're Jewish women with big racks. Of course people keep coming up to us to ask us for pictures, to thank us for our advocacy.
We're Jewish women with big racks. Of course I'm wearing my Star of David and hostage ribbon.
Jewish women with big racks. The restroom's this way.
We're Jewish women with big racks, and I'm at this conference in hopes of finding my husband.
Okay, so I guess the idea is much like this show that's going to humanize Jews. This will, I don't know, what would the word be? Incentivize Jews, I guess, who are interested in women with big racks to attend ADL conferences. It's so good. I mean, it's just brilliant hasbara. I do have to say I like this because there's this problematic stereotype that Jews are smarter than everyone else. And whenever you see something like this, it helps shatter that myth.
Yeah, I just want to apologize on behalf of Jews for that clip, and also on behalf of useful idiots. I'm sorry that we subjected you to that. I feel bad.
Yeah, and I didn't give a trigger warning. I should have.
That's just horrible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, look, isn't that terrible? Nothing can be as terrible as what we just saw, but I'll do my best. Here is a list of Democratic senators, including Richard Blumenthal, Andy Kim, Chris Coons, Mark Kelly, Tim Kaine, many others, who dropped a response video to Trump. But the problem is they all read from the same script. It has the feel of that Sinclair network scandal where basically like more than 200 anchors were caught all reading the same right-wing talking points because Sinclair is a conservative network. And Democrats have apparently decided that's a good idea for their response to Trump.
I win, I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one.
It ain't true. That's what you just heard. Day one of Donald Trump's presidency, prices have gone up. Inflation is getting worse. Not prices. Prices of gas, housing, residential rent. These are all getting worse. Meanwhile, Donald Trump does nothing. Lower prices.
I guess
they're on message. You got to give them credit for being on message.
They're on message, and they're also being efficient. You know, they're not wasting resources by having multiple different script writers. Everyone's reading from the same script, so that's commendable.
Yeah.
And again, listen. They do have a strong political argument here. Like, what is Trump doing right now to lower prices? Nothing. Right. Nothing. Prices are the same, and he can only get away with blaming Joe Biden for so much longer. You know, like eventually he's going to have to take some ownership of his economy, given that he is the president. But yeah, it's just funny to see Democrats adopting a similar tactic as Sinclair Group did. But at the same time, I can't fully hate on it because at least they're being efficient, and at least they're talking about something that's actually substantive, which is prices and Trump's cuts to social programs.
Yeah. And also, you know, Aaron did apologize on behalf of Useful Idiots for our subjecting you to the Jewish women with big racks video, but you should be very thankful that we're not making you watch each Democratic response one at a time, which we could have done.
All true. True. Yes, all true.
All righty. Well, those are your 4 basic food groups.
For this week's guest, we are joined by the Duran. That is the duo of Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris. They have a YouTube channel that I highly recommend. Very, very insightful on geopolitics, in particular, the proxy war in Ukraine. I listen to it daily. And we'll be speaking to Alex and Alexander today about the war in Ukraine and also about the Middle East, where the Trump administration this week confirmed that it is speaking directly to Hamas, all while Trump continues to put out bellicose threats against Hamas. So a little bit all over the place. And the Duran is here to help us make sense of it. Now, one note on this interview, Katie is traveling, so she was not able to join us. And let's go to the Duran. Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou of the Duran, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us. Pleasure to be here.
Want to ask you about Trump's shift on Ukraine. Big rhetorical shift in saying that we have to end this war and we have to have negotiations with Russia, but now some policy shifts as well. This week, Trump suspending the transfer of U.S. weaponry to Ukraine, and also, perhaps even more significantly, the suspension of intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which allows Ukraine to carry out attacks, including inside Russia. Your thoughts on the significance of these policy shifts by Trump?
It is absolutely seismic. I think it is every bit as important as you said. And one of the things that's for me is very, very interesting is that not only is it important in itself, but that it has confirmed so much of what all three of us have been saying. Because, for example, we have an article today, a big article. It was headline news in the Daily Telegraph. Trump switches off Ukraine's missiles. So this admission that the Ukrainians were only able to launch their missiles, including their missiles, into Russia with American help. And suddenly we have the confirmation that that is true. Also confirmation, it's all over the British media, that all those airplanes that were flying near to Ukraine and Russian territory, these NATO airplanes, American airplanes, were indeed providing intelligence to the Ukrainians. We knew that, but it's useful to know these things. But it is seismic because without the intelligence, especially without the weapons, the whole character of the war changes. It's not just whether Ukraine can go on fighting without these things. Ultimately, it probably can't. But if the US is not providing intelligence and it's not providing weapons equipment in that sense, then it's clearly been a major party to the war, and it is withdrawing itself. So it is no longer a conflict between America and Russia in the way that it has been up to now, the proxy conflict that Marco Rubio said it was, just not coincidentally, just a short time ago. It becomes a conflict in which the United States is no longer a direct party to the extent that it has been, if this sticks. So it is seismic. Of course, we're told it's a pause. It might be resumed in the future. That makes no logical sense. That doesn't mean that it might not resume in the future. Very little about what's been going on over the last 3 years, and especially the last few weeks, is exactly logical. But the fact that it's happened at all is of huge significance.
Alex, before you respond, let's go to that clip that Alexander mentioned of Marco Rubio calling this a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia.
It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict. And frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies on Capitol Hill and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy.
That's Secretary of State Marco Rubio, highest level admission I've seen from the U.S. side that this is indeed a proxy war, and also significant that he's talking about the need to bring it to an end as opposed to his predecessor, Antony Blinken, who was intent on prolonging the war despite being a diplomat. Alex, your thoughts on this?
I got a message from a viewer of ours who said that what Trump is doing is reframing everything. He's reframing the entire way the American public views the conflict in Ukraine. And I think that's a very correct assessment. In the White House, Trump got into an argument with Zelensky, and he was pretty much yelling at Zelensky, saying, "You're playing with World War III." And he said it multiple times. It's hard to tell if Zelensky actually understood it. But Trump was telling him, "You're playing with World War III. You're playing with World War III." I think this comment from Rubio was intentional. I don't think this was some sort of a mistake or something like that. I believe this is the messaging now that the Trump White House wants to get out there. It's almost as if they're slowly starting to get the American people to understand that the past 3-4 years under Biden was indeed a proxy war with Russia. And I believe that Trump is going to position his administration as the administration that is trying to remove the United States from the danger of World War III and a danger of some sort of nuclear conflict with Russia by admitting that it's a proxy war and we're going to get out of this proxy war. That's my sense of where he's going with this. I don't think the comment from Rubio was a mistake. I believe that the messaging is going to continue to be that the U.S. was more involved in this than the Biden administration was leading people on to believe, because for the 3 years we were hearing the U.S. is not a party to this war. NATO is not a party to this war. Europe is not a party to this war. As we were hearing for 3 years. And all of a sudden, everything's been reframed. Everything's shifted.
Yeah, and we're learning still amazing revelations about even the period before Russia invaded, before February 2022. So, for example, last year, on the second anniversary of Russia's invasion, the New York Times had that long article where they slipped in somewhere, deep down that, oh yeah, by the way, the CIA has built 10 new bases inside of Ukraine since 2014 and has basically been controlling Ukraine's intelligence services and has even trained people who've been taking part in the assassinations of rebel leaders in the Donbass that Russia's been backing since 2014. So these admissions slowly coming out about what has preceded all of this, and I think what helped provoke Russia to invade. But now, I mean, it's just so unprecedented that to get at this level, someone like the Secretary of State saying, yes, this is indeed a proxy war. It has to come to an end.
It is unprecedented, and it's not a chance. I absolutely agree with Alex about this. I think Rubio knew exactly what he was doing, and it is interesting that he is the person who comes out and just under the radar, very quietly, very casually, over the course of other discussions, makes these extraordinary statements. He made this extraordinary statement a few weeks ago when he gave this interview to Megyn Kelly that the unipolar moment is over, that the United States is one great power amongst several, that it must pursue its own interests, that the entire end of history period of American foreign policy has essentially come to an end, which is a massive reversal of everything that the US has been saying it's been doing for the last 30 years. And suddenly, very casually, very quietly, Rubio says, well, that's no longer the case. We've now got to think in a completely different way. And now he's come and he's done exactly the same thing. He's slipped out without much fanfare, just under the radar, the admission that this is a proxy war. And I would go further. I would say it was more than just a proxy war, actually, because a proxy war implies that there are, that there were two parties on each side fighting each other, and the Americans and the Russians are moving pawns across a chessboard. It hasn't really been like that at all, because the United States has been far more deeply enmeshed in the actual operations of the war, the operational side of the war, than, say, the Soviet Union was during the Vietnam War in supporting North Vietnam. I mean, which is a war I know reasonably well. The Soviets provided a lot of military and economic aid to North Vietnam at that time, but they weren't running Ukraine's intelligence apparatus. They weren't establishing CIA or KGB bases in North Vietnam in quite the same way. It was a war in which the Soviets were much more removed. This war is one in which the Americans are much more directly engaged, almost a coalition war, if you like, in which different members of the coalition have different roles. The Ukrainians provide the absolutely critical thing, and we should not downplay this, the soldiers on the battle line, the people who actually do the fighting. But others provide the command and control, the intelligence, the weapons, the equipment, the logistics, all of those other things. And the Americans were a party to that. So step by step by step, we're getting closer to that point of admission. And of course, and that comes back to your point, it has a long backstory. It didn't all just begin in February 2022, which is what we are always and relentlessly told.
Just to give one anecdote on this point. So there's a recent article in the New Yorker magazine about a Ukrainian intelligence officer. And this article basically discloses that the CIA was involved with Ukrainian intelligence officials who were assassinating rebel leaders in the Donbass, which who Russia was supporting. This is years before Russia invaded. And so, for example, when they assassinated one of them in an elevator, afterwards, officers at the CIA received a commemorative patch that read "elevator." So the CIA was celebrating the assassination of Ukrainian of ethnic Russian Ukrainians at the hands of Ukrainian forces, clearly showing that the CIA has just played a much bigger role in this war well before Russia invaded than we publicly know.
Yeah, we had like you mentioned, we had the articles about a year ago from the Washington Post and the New York Times, which was talking about the CIA's involvement. But those articles were as you said, Aaron, they were celebratory.
Yeah,
they were talking about the great achievement that the CIA had made with the SBU. People like Budanov, they highlighted people like Budanov and how he was trained by the CIA, and they took a crumbling intel service in Ukraine in 91, 92, and they rebuilt the whole thing to be part, almost as if it was a department of the CIA. And I remember those were New York Times articles and Washington Post articles, and they were talking about this openly back then, but it was more of a congratulatory type of article talking how the CIA had made the SBU into this formidable intel agency that was taking on Russia.
Let me ask you about also reports that the Trump administration is speaking to Zelensky's political opponents. What do you make of that? Alex, we'll start with you. And do you think Zelensky's days as Ukraine's leader are numbered?
I think it's interesting that they're speaking to, they claim Timoshenko and Poroshenko's people. I think the person that's left out is Zelensky. I think that's an interesting point because Zelensky is seen as the main opposition to Zelensky. But I also, and this is just my opinion, I believe that Zelensky is very much the UK's guy. I look at Zelensky as the UK backup to Zelensky if Zelensky starts to fall away.
And he's the current Ukrainian ambassador to the UK.
He's the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK. It was supposed to be Reznikov, who was the former defense minister of Ukraine. I don't know where he went. Then Zelensky was appointed the ambassador. And on a side note, there were BBC articles as well as Washington Post and AP articles which had claimed that it was Zelensky who masterminded the Nord Stream sabotage. Zelensky denies those claims from the BBC, AP, and Washington Post, I believe, were the articles that claimed that. But he's not being interviewed by the United States. Timoshenko is an interesting character. I think Alexander could speak about Timoshenko. I remember her as the natural gas princess was her nickname. Very wealthy, very powerful. One time she was a big competitor for the presidency of Ukraine. I don't think she's that popular anymore. And Poroshenko, well, he's Poroshenko, another very wealthy oligarch, the chocolate king. He's a rival of Zelensky. He's under sanctions. He's had from what I understand, his passport taken. He's under surveillance. But my read of things is that it's Poroshenko and Klitschko are the main team that would like to remove Zelensky and take power. But Poroshenko is also a very controversial figure because he was the person that started the entire conflict in 2015.
And he started it how? Explain for people who aren't familiar.
Well, he was the person that pretty much started the civil war. Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, he was one of the main financial backers of the nationalist movement that overthrew Viktor Yanukovych in 2014, and he was opponent of Yanukovych, and of course he became president shortly after Yanukovych was overthrown. And it's widely suspected in Ukraine. I've never seen confirmation of this, and I want to make it clear this is just a suspicion, a rumor, a story, that he was the main financial backer behind groups like Right Sector, for example, which would make him a very difficult person for the Russians. He was the person who signed off on the so-called anti-terrorist operation, who launched the offensive against Donbass in June 2014, which started the fighting then. He was the man who negotiated the Minsk agreement with Merkel and Putin in Minsk in February 2015, who's now come forward and said that he never intended to implement the Minsk agreement. I think the fundamental problem with Poroshenko is that as far as the Russians are concerned, he is such damaged goods now that I don't think they would accept him as an appropriate interlocutor. Now, my own sense, if I can just discuss this briefly, I think the Americans do want to see Zelensky go. I think that they're very frustrated by him. They've met with him. They see him as unreliable. I think they also feel that he's become altogether too close to some of their European allies who would like to continue the war. So I think that the Americans do want to see the war end. They do want to have an Ukrainian partner who will help them end the war. And I think they distrust Zelensky in doing that. And I think by cutting off intelligence support and cutting off military support, what they're trying to do is to shape also the political landscape in Kiev in order to get Zelensky out. But they have a great problem because Zelensky's been there now for 3 years. He's very deeply embedded in the institutions in Ukraine. He's had a lot of support from the Europeans, and he's showing no sign of wanting to go. And it's going to be very difficult to remove him. Now, my own view, by the way, is that of all of these people the Americans are talking to, their ideal candidate is Tymoshenko. Tymoshenko used to be a very, very popular figure in Ukraine. She also, importantly, used to have a very good and friendly relationship with Vladimir Putin. They actually did deals with each other. She signed a very controversial gas deal with Putin, which was what, by the way, landed her in prison when she got back to Ukraine. There's a widespread story that actually Putin wanted her to win the presidency, not Viktor Yanukovych, who eventually did. And the Americans have been reaching out to Tymoshenko for quite a while now. She was invited to Trump's inauguration. She was apparently there in the room when Trump was inaugurated, which of course Zelensky wasn't. The problem is exactly what Alex said. She is also yesterday's person. She hasn't been a major figure in Ukrainian politics for some time. She's also very unpopular with large sections of Ukrainian society. It's all very well talking about Tymoshenko as a successor or a potential replacement for Zelensky. That might look like an attractive idea in Washington. I don't think it works very well in terms of politics in Kiev today.
And just one point, there was talk earlier about the so-called anti-terrorist operation that kicked off the war in the Donbass in early 2014 after the coup in which Yanukovych was overthrown. And when did Ukraine kick off that attack on the Donbass? Right after the head of the CIA, John Brennan, visited Kyiv, met with the new coup government. And according to one person who was present, who I interviewed, Andrei Tilachenko, who was a former Ukrainian official, he says that John Brennan encouraged the new Ukrainian government to launch that anti-terrorism operation, which again just speaks to the huge influence that the U.S. has had in Ukraine dating back to the 2014 coup, when I think you can really trace the beginning of this war, contrary to what we're told it began simply when Russia invaded. But moving to Europe now, I want to play a clip of French President Emmanuel Macron, who was still talking very tough when it comes to Europe's stance on Russia. This is Macron the other day.
Direction, and I welcome them. And we need to continue to help Ukrainians resist until they can negotiate with Russia a solid and lasting peace for themselves and for all of us. The path to peace cannot be achieved by abandoning Ukraine. We cannot conclude peace at any price, according to Russian dictate. The price of peace cannot be the collapse of Ukraine, nor can it be based on a weak ceasefire. And we've had experience of this in the past as well. We cannot forget that Russia started its invasion of Ukraine in 2014, and we negotiated the Minsk Accords ceasefire. That was something that Russia didn't respect, and we weren't able to maintain the balance because there weren't solid guarantees. So we can't take Russia at its word. Russia has a right to peace and security for itself, and it's in our interest and the interest of the European continent.
So a lot to respond to there. I guess, Alex, starting with you, Macron says that we can negotiate with Russia, and he cites the failure of the Minsk Accords. He says Russia can't be trusted because Russia didn't respect the Minsk Accords. This is a topic that you guys have discussed extensively, and it's a widespread narrative that Macron's putting forth that's accepted here where I am in the U.S., but it's just not true. And I'm curious your thoughts on what he's saying there about how Russia can't be trusted because it was Russia's fault that the Minsk Accords were never fulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lie. It's a flat out lie. And we have 3 statements, I believe, from Merkel, recent statements over the past 2 years, where she has said that the Minsk Accords were nothing more than a way for Ukraine to get time in order to prepare for some sort of a conflict with Russia. She's on record saying this. Hollande, who was the president before Macron, and I believe he was there during the Minsk I negotiation, he has said that Merkel is correct. He said Merkel is correct in her assessment. The Minsk Accords were a way for the Ukraine military to rearm and to buy time. We've had statements from Poroshenko, multiple statements from Poroshenko, where he has made the same claim. And even Macron said a few days before the special military operation happened, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a video that Macron leaked where he was having a call with Putin.
Yes.
And and he was talking with Putin. In that call, Macron tells Putin the Minsk agreements are dead. We're never going to implement them. Forget about it. And 4 or 5 days later, you had the special military operation. So even Macron has put out a video where he talks about how the Minsk agreements are not going to happen. They're not going to be enforced.
What Macron said to Putin in that video, and again, this is Macron's video that he put out himself. He says that, separatist leaders don't make the laws in countries. Democratic countries make the laws, not separatist leaders. And what he's basically saying there is that these separatist leaders, or he calls them separatist leaders in the Donbass, they're not separatists. Actually, they just wanted autonomy inside of Ukraine with their rights respected. Simply that they were going to have limited autonomy inside of Ukraine. That was the bargain of Minsk. And this was endorsed by his home government, France, and the UN Security Council. And that was the agreement. And now he's saying, no, they don't get the right to make laws. Putin's response was that actually the Ukrainian government is not democratic. But putting that aside, I mean, that's what Minsk called for, is giving these whatever you want to call them, separatist leaders in Donbass some limited autonomy. Alexander, your thoughts on Macron's comments, where I believe he also talked too about the need for what he called a pacified Russia.
Yes, I mean, this is an astonishing thing because, of course, that kind of approach basically sets Europe into a kind of indefinite confrontation with Russia. Because what is a pacified Russia? I mean, what does he mean by that? I mean, what he basically means, a Russia that's disarmed and a Russia that is in some ways subordinated to Western interests. That's not something that the Russians will ever agree to. So it's a formula for indefinite confrontation. And again, when Macron talks about, we need to support Ukraine to negotiate a just peace, it's the repetition of the formulas we have been hearing for the last 3 years, and which have prolonged the war throughout that time, and which have brought a disaster upon Ukraine and upon its people, and which are destroying the country. I mean, I find myself here, and I come from completely different political tradition to him, but I find myself agreeing with what J.D. Vance has been saying. This kind of approach is not saving Ukraine, it's destroying Ukraine. And Macron clings to it. He won't let it go. And it's not helping Ukraine. Who ultimately is it helping? It's helping Zelensky because it enables Zelensky to continue in Kiev. It's helping the European leaders, maybe, because they want to take various positions and to appear to stand up to Donald Trump. I have to say also that there's a strong element of domestic politics in all of this. Macron's very unpopular in France, so he's here posing again to the French people as the strong leader of France, who's going to stand up to the Russians and the Americans as well, because there's a subcurrent of criticism of the Americans right through that broadcast. But as Alex and I recently discussed, it's also partly Macron, again, looking to seize leadership in Europe before the Germans rearm, as he fears, and start displacing France as the major military power in Western Europe. So he wants to, he talked elsewhere in the broadcast about extending French nuclear protection across Europe and all of those sort of things. So he wants to stake out again something he repeatedly has been trying to do, a leadership position for France, and in some respects for himself in Europe, even as the political geometry changes and changes so fast. It's not going to go down very well. This speech, by the way, is not going to go down very well in Germany or in Britain. There's already tensions starting to grow. The British were not pleased with Macron's 1 month ceasefire plan, for example.
This proposal now from Europe that basically we're going to have a European peacekeeping force that's going to include Turkey, UK, France, but we need the U.S. to back us up with air cover. A backstop. That's the term being used. Trump does not seem very interested in that. If the U.S. does not sign on to this, and also if Russia does not sign on to this, because Russia has rejected this proposal so far of European troops. I mean, what are the prospects, Alex, for this proposal?
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.
And again, very grateful to Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou of the Duran. You can go to their YouTube channel for more. Katie Halper, again, couldn't join us because she is on the road, but she'll be back next week as normal. Thanks so much for watching Useful Idiots. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there, support the show, get bonus content. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.